I'm David Levi Strauss, chair of the MFA program in art writing here at the School of Visual Arts. Thank you all for coming. We're here today for a reading and hearing, and most of all for a celebration of the class of 2017. But first I have a few thank yous to make. As all of you in this graduating class know, none of us could have gotten through the past 2 years without the kind help and guidance of my intrepid assistant, Annette Warehan. And you also all know that she's been away from us for the past month or so, as she gave birth on April 11th under a full moon in Libra to twin baby boys. This is Emmett and Claude. This is before. This is not working now. There we go. And this is after. This is how they dress in Brooklyn. Queens. So just as she shepherded you all through the program, she brought Emmett and Claude into the world safely and beautifully, and everyone's good. Annette and I agreed beforehand that Emmett and Claude will both be enrolled in the program very soon. Annette has confirmed that they'll skip Goodnight Moon and go directly to Eros and Magic in the Renaissance. Thanks to Emily Weiner, who has very generously agreed to fill in for Annette and has gone beyond the call, as has Amelia Reyna. I want to thank Jennifer Krasinski, who has prepared you for the task you've all just completed better than anyone else could have. And I want to thank the individual faculty members who acted as your thesis advisors this year. Deborah Bricker-Balkin, Thomas Beard, Jennifer Krasinski, Dehan Lukic, Siddhartha Mitter, Nancy Princenthal, and Chuck Stein. And also Sam Swayze for all his help. None of you would be here today without their help. Thank you all. I wanted to note that Dehan, who acted as thesis advisor for Cheatham, Nahid, and Rula, couldn't be here today because he's still teaching, which is typical, always teaching. And Deborah Bricker-Balkin, the advisor for Alice, is on her way back from the Venice Biennale, where she's been installing a Mark Tobey exhibition. And Siddhartha has food poisoning, just back from West Africa. And finally, I want to thank all of you, the class of 2017, for all your hard work, perseverance, curiosity, and goodwill these past 2 years. For all of you, the thesis is the most substantial piece of writing you've ever done. The process is necessarily difficult, but you've come through it with grace and humor. Thank you all for being here and for giving me the distinct pleasure of working with each of you for this brief time. Just because you've finished the course, don't be strangers. Thank you. Jennifer?
How do you do, everyone? My name is Jennifer Krasinski. I'm on faculty here, as Levi already told you. And I worked with the graduating class both for the fall and spring semesters, so writing 3 on through their thesis workshop. And it was absolutely my distinct pleasure. One of the great things about my job is that I meet people and they call themselves students, and we work together in a workshop, going over their writing once a week, hearing their ideas and so forth. And by the time they leave, I very proudly get to call them colleagues now, which is very exciting. I just wanted to let you know that what you're going to hear tonight, of course, is a tiny little sliver of what they've actually produced. And in these brief readings, relatively brief readings, you will hear both great ideas, beautiful articulations, the seeds of possibilities of all of their future work as well. And most definitely, I think you will hear some very beautiful, strong, and brilliant voices before you. Have a wonderful evening. And may I first bring up Danny Kopel.
Hi, my name is Danny, and I'm going to read a bit of my thesis. This is a chapter called Piercing. The thesis itself is called Fever of the Senses, St. Sebastian's New Cult. Regarding the pain of others is Susan Sontag's analysis of the complicated act of looking at images of suffering and atrocity. She lays out the ethical implications of our voyeurism, namely our desire for such images, and asks what our responsibilities might be as viewers. She writes, "It seems that the appetite for pictures showing bodies in pain is as keen almost as the desire for ones that show bodies naked." This latter territory she explored in an earlier essay, 1967's The Pornographic Imagination, in which she argued that in a secular society such as ours, our innate drive for transcendence, previously channeled into religion and belief, gets redirected towards sexual acts of an increasingly extreme character. It is precisely this kind of aberrant sexuality that is the subject of a great deal of the work of Robert Mapplethorpe, a lapsed Catholic who would turn to depicting deviant sexual acts borrowed from the BDSM scene in which he actively participated, though always rendering them through an enduringly Catholic sensibility. The obsessive training of Mapplethorpe's lens on the sculpted male physique, for instance, echoes the Catholic notion that the perfection of the body signals or leads to the perfection of the soul. Though Mapplethorpe disavowed his religion early on, he remained on an orthodox quest for purity, of image, of spirit, and on a quest for transcendence of himself and of his subject. The exciting aspects of Mapplethorpe's work have to do with the binary oppositions present therein, a set of dualities not unlike the oppositions on which Catholicism lays its foundations, body and soul, heaven and hell, which Sontag calls religious polarities. One of the most provocative oppositions present in Mapplethorpe's work is the one between Catholicism and homosexuality. Asked by an interviewer what he considered sacred, Mapplethorpe simply replied, "Sex." Mapplethorpe's notion of sex, we've seen, was hardly wholesome, yet for all of its transgressiveness, it is oddly Catholic in character. His depictions of bondage and sadomasochism conjure not only the mortifications of martyrdom, but recall, in the care and attention paid to composition, the religious artworks that delivered said content. Between Guido Reni's St. Sebastian and Mapplethorpe's 1973 Polaroid of a bound man, there is little difference, not only in the pose of the figure, but in the accoutrement as well. To the latter, Mapplethorpe has simply added a leather mask, lest we be confused about what kind of image, sacred or depraved, we're looking at. Catholicism, in a sense, might have nurtured more than just a plastic sensibility in Mapplethorpe, who said, "I arrange things in a Catholic way." It may have accounted for a set of predilections, a sensuously carnal and cruelty-inflected worldview. Images of suffering, like the crucified Christ, after all, must have been Mapplethorpe's first exposure not only to art, but to the representation of the body. This is true of many others as well, artists or not. For many who grew up in the church, ingrained notions of transcendence were bound up not only with the body, but with a bare and bloodied one at that. Eleanor Hartney makes an argument for such, quote, incarnational consciousness, end quote, in Postmodern Heretics, the Catholic Imagination in Contemporary Art, maintaining that bringing an artist's religious training to bear on the reading of their work, an impulse long suppressed in scholarship and criticism, might open up new and productive threads of discussion. Hartney makes a strong case for the influence of Catholic imagery, Christ and the grisly fates of the martyrs, on the work of artists who deal with the body in ways that test or transform it. In a chapter titled The Trials of the Body Artist, Blood Rituals and Endurance Art, she discusses how such an exposure is foundational for an artist like Chris Burden. Though Burden did not grow up Catholic per se, he claims an important exposure and influence to the religion. Hartney compares Transfixed, a performance in which Burden's hands were nailed to the hood of a Volkswagen, to the Imitation of Christ, the, quote, sympathetic emulation of the bleeding wounds of the crucified Christ, end quote, and remarks on the artist's use of his own body to attain a heightened consciousness in a manner strikingly reminiscent of the mystical visions which allowed religious figures like Saint Teresa to make contact with the divine realm through the sensations of their physical bodies. Teresa, let us be reminded, received the love of God in her heart, pierced there again and again by an arrow at the hands of an angel who appeared to her. Bernini's sculptural group, The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, from 1647, dramatized her verbal recollection of the event, taking from it his cue to render in her facial expression religious revelation as a kind of orgasmic state. Quote, the pain was so great that it caused me to utter several moans, and yet so exceedingly sweet is this greatest gift of pains that it is impossible to desire to be rid of it, end quote. Burden's work belongs to the first wave of body art. A second wave, taking place during the 80s and 90s, is inflected by the AIDS crisis that is contemporary with it. The disease and the homophobic backlash and fear-mongering perpetuated by the religious right is the backdrop for the work of artists like Ron Athey. Athey, having grown up in a fanatical Pentecostal household, was primed to become a minister, and at a young age alleges that he received the gift of being able to speak in tongues. In some of his performance works, this ability is called upon. Though Athey has renounced his faith, like Mapplethorpe, his aesthetic still draws from his religious background. He not only borrows the imagery, but also transplants an entire atmospheric sense of ritual and ceremony from the worship service to his performances. Sebastian, 1994, part of the Martyrs and Saints cycle, is a passion play, one in which Athey and his troupe of performers reenact a version of the Sebastian story. It is a retelling rife not with inaccuracies and anachronisms, but with modifications that reveal Athey's specific interest in the subject of Sebastian as a plague saint, given Athey's own HIV diagnosis and the toll of the epidemic on his social and artistic milieu. Take for instance that in Sebastian, Athey is pierced not by arrows, but by hypodermic needles. In one iteration of the performance from 1999, he hangs from a harness of ropes, arms bound overhead, as his company of performers insert the needles just under the skin, in, under, and out again, around his head to make a crown of steel thorns. Longer needles, outfitted with feather fletchings to resemble arrows, dot his body. These he receives in almost saintly submission. Most piercings he readily accepts. Some he flinches to admit, grimacing and emitting a sound which blurs the line between an expression of pain and a pronouncement in tongues. His eyes are glassy from either pain or a vision. His eyes roll back, at times appearing to be on the brink of losing consciousness altogether. The harness twists and rocks almost imperceptibly, a quiet pendulum. Athey is very still. When the needles are removed, he bleeds. Athey has called Sebastiane a sort of bloodletting performance. Blood is ever present in his work, sometimes to controversial effect. In a 1994 performance of another work, he dabbed the blood from patterns cut into the skin of another performer onto paper towels, hung them, and pulled them like a clothesline over the audience. Claims by a reporter that Athey must have exposed members of the audience to HIV or AIDS led to a scandal on an international scale, one that played on the fear and hysteria surrounding AIDS. Perhaps some of the power of Athey's performances is not the fear that it can and has instilled, but the sincere search for catharsis that he undertakes by submitting the body, his and the bodies of his performers, to physical trials resembling the mortifications of the saints. Thank you.
Rula Khoury, my thesis is Manam, what do you see in your sleep? This is the image. Tariq shares her dream with Riyad. August 31 in 1981, They are at the Palestinian, they are sitting at the Palestinian refugee camp in Shatila. Tariq says, once, Riyadh, I dreamed I was walking maybe in Jordan. Then I saw an old man standing and putting his hands behind his back. He stood with his head lifted, watching the sky. I approached and asked him, "What are you looking at, Hajj?" He said to me, "Can't you see?" I looked up and saw horses in the sky being ridden by soldiers. I said to him, "Yes, you're right. Praise God. Riyadh, I saw them with my very eyes. A line of white horses and another line of green horses, and the soldiers were fighting with swords. I was standing saying, 'God, God.' Suddenly the horses came down to the ground. I looked at the ground and saw that they had become like huge roosters, like turkeys. There was a line of blue roosters and a line of brown ones. There were no soldiers or swords at all. These roosters attacked each other and started fighting. Each one was jumping on the other. The sheikh turned to me and said, 'You see, daughter, they're fighting so we can liberate Palestine.'" Riyadh interrupted in the middle of her stories, her dream, saying, "Like Cain and Abel, that is." That's the end of the dream. Often the Palestinian narrative blurs the borders between reality, dreams, and illusion. Manam is an attempt to document an alternative Palestine, one which lives only in people's minds, an attempt to recreate their motherland in spite of the harsh reality. The documentary film El Manam, directed by Syrian director Muhammad Malas, is the cornerstone of this research. It was filmed between 1980 and 81, before the infamous massacre in Sabra and Shatila in September of 1982, where part of the film was set. The film is a collection of interviews with Palestinian refugees in Lebanon during the Civil War. The director interviewed the children, women, elders, and militants about their dreams. Malas' film attempts to reveal the underlying collective subconscious of the Palestinian refugees through their dreams. The meaning of the word manam in Arabic is sleep or dream. The use of the word in a sentence takes an interesting interpretation of what someone sees in his or her sleep. An example of the origins of the word and how it appears in verse can be found in the sacrifice of Isaac in the Quran. When Abraham says, "My son, I see in my sleep that I'm slaughtering you. Look what happened." The visions the Palestinians see while asleep can have various connotations. Their memories and longing for Palestine have seeped into their dreams and shaped them. The borders between reality and illusions are so blurred in the subconscious that when these dreams are narrated and projected into reality, it is almost impossible to discern if they are fiction or non-fiction. The voices of the Palestinians telling their own stories or thoughts regarding their own experiences is often silenced and/or taken lightly and deemed unimportant. Edward Said wrote for the London Review of Books in February 1984 an article entitled "Permission to Narrate." And he says, "Facts do not at all speak for themselves, but require a socially acceptable narrative to absorb, sustain, and circulate them. Such a narrative has to have a beginning and end. In the Palestinian case, a homeland for the resolution of its exile since 1948. The title of the article traps and brings to the forefront the idea that through dreams, the subconscious and inner self screams out its personal story. The research that I did looks closely at the context of a dream, covering 3 specific subjects as lucid dream, frame within a frame, and replicating reality. The photo on the right is a painting of Amr Shomali, and he's part of the frame within a frame chapter. And the photograph on the left is a photo for Chris, forgot the family name, that was taken in 1982. We'll skip. The selection of dreams that were narrated in the movie El Manam have been used as an opening to each section within this research. The spirit of each dream connects to the artworks in each section, reflecting the dreams from within the art. The power of human nature, the physical and mental needs of one being, the daily struggles of life, and the constant search for comfort and stability. Naturally, most want to feel like they belong to something, anything meaningful. Part of this belonging is an ongoing search for identity and values, thinking about previous obstacles as well as current situation in life as a whole. Entering a different world, transitional state, have the potential to yield solutions to complex problems and provide intense, deep observation. The awareness and understanding of the personal mental process and the efforts to think rationally. Dreams are intuitive to liminal experience. Before sleep sets an intention to raise a specific question or concern in a dream. This combination produces images, symbols, and perceptions that represent the physical and mental state. The dream of the Palestinians is stuck in a liminal space, in between forgetting to remember, even occupied, always keeping Palestine in the mind, never forgetting. This reflects the actual state of the situation, even if it is through the symbols or reconstructing or framing in gold the actual message. They became stateless, prevented by force and trauma, struggling through their dreams with a tunnel vision, constantly searching for the light at the end. Limitless in the mind, with all of these borders, caught in the liminal space between 2 worlds, a dream or a memory, blurred and destroyed. The walls that are built in the mind block the imagination. Or maybe when you get to the point where you do not have any hope left for change and you are in the bottom of your sorrow, maybe then the imagination will flourish. Arafat portrayed himself as a father figure, creating an illusion that led Palestinians into a liminal space, and they are still there unsolved. Last night, I dreamed that I was home, walking the streets of Haifa. As I made a turn on a busy main road near Wadi Nisnas, it was suddenly blocked by a huge concrete slab. I somehow found my way in, but then realized that I was in the middle of a deserted garden, surrounded by more walls. I was trapped in the middle and didn't know how to escape. All of a sudden, a group of children started gathering around me, and they were laughing at me, making fun of my predicament. The young boys and girls then began to make suggestions, attempting to help me out of the garden. One of them points to a green metal door that I had not previously noticed or seen. I reach for the door, and to my surprise, it springs open. As I stepped through the door, I saw the continuous of the busy street, only this time it was clear. Then I woke up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Zilin from China, and my thesis title is Emoji, Past and Future, the Nature of Pictographic Language. How did this happen, I wonder? How are people able to do this? If we can converse with picture icons alone, what do we need words for? Are our language supposed to be dictated by sounds which convey meanings? But sounds are totally absent from the conversation with emoji icons, and yet conversation are proceeding and meaning is exchanged. I wonder if sometime in the near future, a bundle of minute-long GIF emoticons will literally speak for us. We will no longer converse by typing words into a cell phone, but by selecting those talking cute figures in emoticons that do. If this were to occur, would it be considered an improvement? The same could be asked whether it would be an improvement when a vast number of people only write with keyboards, gradually forgetting the somatic memory involved in writing with hands, pens, and papers. The same may have been asked when the first generation of Asian Greeks, who learned to write, trying to express in writing what they were used to expressing with spoken words. Now they had to write down those sounds and at the same time were expected to convey the same emotions in them. They may feel this logic was as absurd as we find the logic to be when confronted with the idea of emoji icons and GIF emoticons that are able to convey meaning without making or representing any sound at all. Here it is. It is this understanding that provides me with a new lens through which to look at emoji. To begin with, is emoji a language? Or is it a rudimentary form? Or is it a rudimentary form of a more sophisticated language in the future? Currently, the argument that emoji is not a language and will not develop into one is held by scholars such as Marcel de Nancy. The basis of this argument lies in the belief that emoji is a technological phenomenon and might be replaced by new technological breakthroughs. However, I am arguing here that emoji is not a technological phenomenon, though it is brought forth by technology. Rather, emoji has a deeper connection with the change of writing method, namely from handwriting to keyboard typing. During the process of keyboard typing, the act of outputting letters loses its function as an outlet of emotion, or rather it becomes an obstacle of expressing emotion. Because the strength that the keyboard typewriter exerts on keys makes no difference in the resulting text on screen. The strength, on the other hand, makes a big difference in handwriting, especially in East Asia when people wrote with writing brushes. This leads me to believe the most drastic shift from handwriting to typing as such might be what has happened in East Asia. The widely spread usage of cell phones and computers leads to a rather painful shift for inputting ideogrammic language by typing Romanized alphabets. This connection also brings me to Chinese language. Thus, I began to form my method. If I can identify some of the prefigures in Chinese as prototypes and point how later characters are formed by adding other components onto them, then with identifying some emoji icons as prototypes and others as development of these prototypes, the linguistic scheme of emoji could be drawn into a clear picture by comparison with the development pattern of Chinese characters. But how can we possibly understand emoji icons? I compare them, the small, adorable faces, with photos. We see them every day, using them without thinking. They are, some people point out, funny faces that add people's text messages so the message looks less like monologue. But the conversation we have for cell phone and the computers are monologues, aren't they? We literally type verbal language into these devices that are perfectly attuned to the absence of the response, because that has been the case of writing for thousands of years. The emoji acts like a mask, like the mask that the actor wore in amphitheater in ancient Greece. It is a symbol of wearer's momentary identity and status. By using emoji, we know that we are not alone here with our machines. And we know that the screen is not the end, but rather a medium through which another person is waiting, responding, and savoring what we are saying. The truth is, we are monologists. We are alone. By enjoying the many options that contemporary devices provide, we are, at the same time, painfully alienated by them. One has to bear much loneliness in contemporary society whilst searching for an identity apart from one's social roles. This is the other side of emoji, the side that emoji eclipses. This despair is... I've decided not to give an example of either the solo exchange of emoticons or passages translated from verbal text into emoji icons. For the former is only understood between interlocutors who know each other well, and the latter will not make much sense because emoji icons are not able to translate information accurately from a phonetic language. None of the attempts of translation are meaningful, for emoji is not a designed system, and as a future language, it is in its primitive stage. Nonetheless, emoji's incapability does not preclude it from becoming a language in the future, because the spatial relation between icons and the synthesis of icon within icons and the already existing prototypes of icons makes emoji's linguistic evolution possible. When emoji does evolve into a language, it will create a new grammatic structure or even a new ontological scheme that would be unrecognizable for the people in 2017. The potential of this change is vast, much bigger than a textual translation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jonelle, and the name of my thesis is Vivid If Unseeable, on Carolee Schneemann's plague column Known Unknown. This is a quote by Carolee Schneemann from 1966. These Americans, wild things, wild life confuses them, makes them uneasy. Bugs, birds, snakes, mud, dirt, and dust discourage their control over the world. In this way, their insecurity increases. They are guilty, cast out, and full of anger and impatience. And this obstructs their pleasures. They proportion and ration contacts. They measure and judge endlessly, narrowly. They even frighten themselves and wonder why. Being distrustful and distrusted, open and naive, the myth, the dream which they do not meet. Xeroxed prints of enlarged malignant cancer cells are collaged and wall-mounted, film strip-like on long, narrow panels, and interspersed throughout Carolee Schneemann's research-based installation, Plague Column Known Unknown, from 1995 to 6. As visual renderings of the disease, these images suggest that by furnishing cancer with a distinct form, we might seek to understand it, or finally to catch it by the lapel. Printed both in bright colour and negative black and white, they are subtly layered with collaged elements, photographic fragments, newspaper type, and lab reports, providing, in the end, little sense of a malign entity decisively beheld. We see glowing, otherworldly bloomings, submerged, fleshy confusion, inscrutable activity, at once chaotic, festering, and beautiful. Glimpses of cancerous cells become confused with the other collaged elements, a small sculpted hand, or most of the word although, the disease's visual presence as diffuse and insidious as its nature. Plague Column is a rarely shown installation built around the research Schneemann conducted into cancer, immunology, and healing while receiving non-allopathic treatment for breast cancer. The conceptual centerpiece of the work, present in the form of photographic snapshots, is a 17th century Austrian Pestauler, or plague column, a statue erected to ward off disease, which Schneemann stumbled upon in a St. Joseph's Church in the Viennese woods in March of 1995. The snapshots, presented scrapbook-like, show a cherub-encircled Madonna triumphing over the bubonic plague, personified as a heinous witch figure, her dreadful breasts secreting deadly serpents. During her cancer research in November of the same year, Schneemann felt compelled to revisit the image's metaphorical richness. That the Pestauler represents the plague as a rabid, unruly female, overcome furthermore by a virginal, saintly one, is a rich exemplar of the binary tropes to which women have historically been subjected and confined. Probing the dense web of power and representation within which the female body is variously snagged, Plague Column intimates a history that repeats itself. The witch hunts of the 15th to the 18th centuries are made to reverberate within present-day medical practices, inviting us to encounter mechanisms of oppression of nature, bodies, and female bodies in particular, as attacks upon a seemingly malign otherness, whether demon or disease. 6 of the cancer cell panels of collage, themselves column-like, flank the Pestauler image and notes, layered with fragmented glimpses of the sculpture in garish blues and reds. The two mingle in a confusion of malignancies, a mutual cross-examination. In 1966, Schneemann wrote that, quote, "Vision is not a fact, but an aggregate of sensations," end quote. An image cannot reach the mind without filtering through the body, where the senses pool and seep, infecting one another. Wanting to stress the extra-visual sense experience involved in the act of seeing, to create images that refuse to sit still or to feign visual facticity, Schneemann began using her body not just as creative agent, but also as visual material, becoming, during the 1960s, one of the first artists to place her body explicitly within her work. The body is, for Schneemann, a region in which image and image maker share space, flickering back and forth. Art historian Yves Alambois, drawing on Georges Bataille's theories of the vertical orientation of human vision and of conventional representation, writes of the framed canvas, quote, "The modernist picture is still conceived as a vertical section that presupposes the viewer's having forgotten that his or her feet are in the dirt. Art, according to this view, is a sublimatory activity that separates the perceiver from his or her body. It is a synthesizing activity as well. Fending off any intrusion from the base, it gathers the perceiver together around the core of its ideal unity," end quote. It is this intrusion from the base that Bataille seeks to explore, a subversive abjection which he designates by the term informé or formless, the insipid, clinging, amorphous space of life that threatens to invade our theories, our language, and our institutions. Its form can be compared only to debased substances and creatures, spiders, earthworms, spit. Art that presents itself as purely visual is addressed to the subject as an erect being, far from the horizontal axis that governs the life of animals. Although by the modern period, art is no longer considered a window onto the world, each work is still to be conceived as a bounded whole, dependent upon an artist's ability to unify a canvas. This binding functions to fend off the chaotic excesses of the material world that would threaten its autonomy. Schneemann's life work, a constant upstream wade against these artistic currents, has been an ongoing séance with the formless. She explodes the visual onto every axis she can find, rooting her feet and other body parts firmly in the muck. The birth of body art in the 1960s can, in general, be seen as an exasperated antidote to the stubborn oculophilia of the academic art world, its treatment of vision as a discrete path for information to zing itself into the body across a sterile gulf. The nets of thought cast by Schneemann in Plague Column invite speculation about the mechanisms of control which have, throughout history, worked to quarantine mind from matter by enacting a thorough disavowal of the body. Thinking about the function of society in sustaining this illusion of a mind-matter duality, about how it holds the world at arm's length by beholding it as image, provides an opportunity to re-examine the significance of Carolee Schneemann's work. In particular, it clarifies her insistence that her body, at once both visual object and creative force, be injected into the process of her image-making, contaminating the notion of a pristine vision. Writing of our stunted relationship to the universe, that general otherness that history has fostered, critic Thomas McEvilley suggests that the archaic reasoning of colonial missionaries was replaced in the 18th century by Kant's critiques. Quote, There one finds the doctrine of the three faculties, the cognitive, the ethical, and the aesthetic, that are said to make up the human as a receptor and processor of information, and the all-important insistence that they have nothing to do with one another. Like senses, each has its proper sphere, in which its judgments are final and authoritative. As one cannot hear the colour red, so one cannot cognitively determine whether an ethical or aesthetic judgment has been properly made, and so on." End quote. Many would object that one can hear the colour red. There are people who also can smell, taste, or feel the colour red quite distinctly, while for the rest of us, its undeniable warmth remains a less clamorous hint of deeper entanglements. The synesthete's experience emerges like a symptom of a world suppressed, a rush of unsorted material upon the kernel of consciousness, making its pangeatic nature known. Carolee Schneemann understands that the dissolution of boundaries in society must begin in the body and between the senses, which is perhaps why the distinctness of vision is so carefully guarded by those with an institutional investment, whether scientific, political, religious, or academic. We saw that this displacement of physicality was Schneemann's, quote, whole problem with theoretical structures, as if there is a seepage or a toxicity from the experience of the body that is going to invade language and invalidate theory, end quote. Schneemann's project as a painter is the return of vision to the body where effects coalesce. Her work enters the world's thrust before it is forced to choose its angle of access. She plunges experience into the body's depths, flooding its swift, trained machinery, its mechanisms of rupture, separation, and allotment, so that with her we might, for brief glimpses, perceive ourselves as native.
Hello, my name is Emma, and my thesis is entitled Universal Overflow, Digital Cosmographies for a Lonely Planet. It began with an itch, the first day of Earth as it would come to be known. A pesky, lingering tickle, the result of the friction, the grind, of innumerable stellar granules turning in space. Before the planets had solidified and the sun had become concentrated, there was nothing to do but wait, recalls the narrator of Italo Calvino's fabulistic Cosmocomics, a sage-like cluster of molecules known as quific, and naturally scratch ourselves. All those particles spinning around had only one effect, a troublesome itching. It was cold and dark, the solar system and its fluid, shapeless nebula. Unprovoked, a change in the dust is noticed. The weight of a body leaves an imprint in the sand, and galactic matter begins to coalesce. Aboard a swirling, gaseous cloud, Quific learns to walk, fall, and feel as he traverses his violently coagulating, suddenly treacherous home landscape. He tries to avoid sinking into the newly formed surface and runs into his dreamy sister, who, playing in the mud, coyly describes the hill she has built as a thing made of things, an outside with an inside in it. Form here is an accumulation of matter, an arrangement of outsides and insides, and a fluke. Contemporary cosmographies play like fables too, as they build models of the universe that begin with a similar inkling, a disturbance, a twitch in empty space. A deep, deliberate inhale, as if through the nose, signals the start of Gross Fatigue from 2013, French installation artist Camille Henry's video that chronicles the unfolding of the material world and human knowledge. In another video, Everything and More from 2015, by American moving image artist Rachel Rose, a soulful hum sounds first, initiating a journey into and out of galactic space. These unseen expressions of body and voice shake off the cosmic cobwebs. Gross Fatigue takes place within the scope and space of a computer desktop. The eponymous file is clicked on and sound and images spill forth. Application windows close on top of one another, open and close on top of one another. Within them is footage of people, animals, natural phenomena, textbooks, anthropological artifacts, Wikipedia pages, and several minutes of the scientists and specimens of the Smithsonian Institution, shot while Henry participated in an artist research fellowship there. A steady, woody drum beat begins when the first window opens, and a lengthy spoken word poem commences. The text is a series of origin stories, the beginnings, middles, and some ends thereof as fragments, one line after another of creation myths from various religious, hermetic, and oral traditions. Quantum physics and the Big Bang are treated too. The pacing is quick, the imagery is dense, and the male voice performing the poem is desperate by the end. It is an onslaught, a proliferation of geneses extending through various material and metaphysical discoveries, air, sex, magic, scientific and epistemological developments, minerals, stereo vision, history, all driving towards the heat death of the universe and utter exhaustion. In the end, the computer file closes, returning to the tidy desktop. Everything and More is organized around interviews Rose conducted with David Wolf, a former NASA astronaut who made 7 spacewalks throughout his career and spent over 4 months aboard the Mir space station. His steady but still awestruck voiceover includes his recollection of the first time he viewed Earth from space and describes the experience of returning home, where everything felt exceptionally heavy and any movement disorienting. While Wolf's testimony plays, multicolored liquids of varying viscosities pool and eddy across the entirety of the screen. These science experiments, as Rose calls them, were made with household products and foodstuffs, olive oil, food dye, water, spread across glass plates and then physically manipulated with compressed air, a magnetized agent, or Rose's own breath, pushed and pulled across the panes and filmed. Woven throughout Wolf's narration are snippets of gospel music, fleeting notes of wordless, digitally exaggerated vocalizations by Aretha Franklin, performing Amazing Grace in 1972. Words and music float and surge alongside one another, tethered together by gravity. Images drift and melt, but with a pull, like the tides. Unro's universe begins by launching into life on Earth. The file folders on the recognizable Mac desktop and the pages that are filmed while being read are instances of the very practice of cataloging and containment Gross Fatigue ends up performing. Rose's opening images are of light, flashes popping on and off, and of liquid, bubbling and spreading, appearing to behave of its own accord. Both videos are weightless digital documents built via accumulation, layering, and piling on. Where Gross Fatigue stacks, everything and more swirls. A leveling occurs in the inundation. On Rose's rapidity and Rose's lingering panning camera work both efface a sense of true difference between moments. The depth of 30 browser windows does not amount to much, and the swirling solutions are a deluge of surface. There is order, however, created through the disavowal of hierarchy in both videos, of science over myth, story over body, study over action, word over image, inquiry over ecstasy, and vice versa. Rhythm is all. In the face of such flattening, the collapse of the dense and the buoyant, and the prominence of the screen, the viewer is located nowhere in the 2 videos, instead left at a distance from the unfurling of the world of which she is a part. Watching either video is a reminder of what it is like to look at something without immediate recourse to a self-centered positioning, without default establishment of relative placement. Charting the course of unwieldy concerns, of knowledge, exaltation, orientation, and so on, becomes the purview of the digital for both artists, a tool with which to track sheer movement of forms. The wholly computer-generated aspects of the videos, including the opening and closing of Unro's browser images and the flow and smear of Rose's liquids from one into another, denote the structure, framing, and cadence of the pieces. The things an actors do not matter. Osiris, a giant turtle, radiated particles, Aretha Franklin, quite as much as the impulse to unleash them does. Such an instinct comes at a time when a totality of vision, of understanding, seems within grasp, due to unprecedented everyday access to images, information, and technology. Such feats are continually outrun, however. Would seeing the whole earth tell you more than one slice of it would? It would tell you, importantly, that it is a finite resource, but not much about what may be contained within, nor how to proceed. The ethics of sourcing, how not to deplete, require both Unro and Rose to plunge back to a beginning of an idea, a species, an emotional or physical state, and move with it. In another cosmic fable of Calvino's, different time, different place, same omnipresent quiffik, He describes the period before the expansion of the universe and hence before space, when, quote, every point of each of us coincided with every point of each of the others in a single point, which was where we all were, end quote. A universal punctum. Unro and Rose's physics cannot be built with points and polar coordinate and axes. Their planar surfaces belie the deep distortions of space their videos create. Unlike Calvino, they follow neither letter nor spirit of the laws, preferring instead to fuse the two, along with fact and fable, science and superstition. They know that violent relaxation and a dislocating orbit are ideas unbound of their oxymoron in their very invocation. That as the universe continues to expand and distend, its containers should too, and that gods and astronauts both get lonely looking down at the earth. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alice Sherman, and my thesis is titled First Art, the Determination of Anni, Albers, Lee Krasner, and Eva Hesse. In class almost 2 years ago, Levi reminded us of the words of the king in Alice in Wonderland, to begin at the beginning. This story has many beginnings, so mine starts in the middle. 1968, America is at war. Never one to shy away from conflict, Susan Sontag goes to Hanoi to see things for herself. It is a year in which countless men are killed. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Francis Kennedy are assassinated before the eyes of the nation. Just as publicly, Andy Warhol survives an attempt on his life. New York's Museum of Modern Art begins the year with Pablo Picasso and closes it with Robert Rauschenberg. John Berger writes The Nature of Mass Demonstration, while crowds of protesters flood the streets of cities in the United States and around the world. Saul LeWitt executes the first of his wall drawings at the Pollard Cooper Gallery for a group show mounted against the war in Vietnam. On a sunny September afternoon, the boardwalk of Atlantic City is filled with women protesting the Miss America pageant, only 2 months after Pope John Paul II prohibits the use of the birth control pill. In New York and in New Haven, 3 artists are working away. In a year when the world seems to change daily, Anni Albers, Lee Krasner, and Eva Hesse remained steadfastly on the path each had chosen as a young woman. By 1968, Anni Albers has established herself as a preeminent textile designer and has turned her attention to printmaking. At the age of 69, she has come full circle in her art and in her life. As a young woman in Berlin, she had proclaimed that she would never succumb to the life of a housewife. Yet it turns out she would do just that, but in her own anti-bourgeois terms. In 1922, she left home to join the Bauhaus, where she remained for 11 years, first as a student in the weaving workshop. She married Joseph Albers in 1925, and the couple fled Germany in 1933. Both became instructors at Black Mountain College in the wilderness of North Carolina, and in 1939, Anni and Joseph Albers became citizens of the United States. In anticipation of the role she would proudly hold 3 decades later, Anni Albers declared housewife to be her occupation on the paperwork. Lee Krasner has by 1968 been a widow for 12 years and is living comfortably. After the death of Jackson Pollock, Krasner found herself in the very strange position of holding the fortunes of abstract expressionism in the palm of one hand, while painting with the other, rebuilding her own reputation as an artist. She spends her summers in the Springs, Long Island, the home she and Pollock built in 1945. When they met in 1941, Krasner was an established member of the New York art world, well aware of the prevalence of misogyny among artists, collectors, and curators. A testament to her understanding of the socio-political landscape of the time, Krasner decided to promote and support rather than compete with Jackson Pollock, whose talent she recognized the day that they met. Her choice is regarded by some art historians and critics to be unfeminist, allowing for the recognition of her work to be diminished. But Lee Krasner was sure that what she saw in Pollock's paintings was more important than anything else. In 1968, it is difficult to prove her wrong when it comes to her initial instincts. Paintings by Jackson Pollock are among the most well-known and most sought-after works in American art. At the same time, 18 of Krasner's recent works are on display at the Marlborough Gershon Gallery. The earliest paintings reveal that Pollock was still very much on her mind in 1964, but her most recent works are different. They reflect the influence of Henri Matisse, the first modern great to inspire her as a young artist. It seems that the legacy of the artist is beginning to catch up with the mythology of the wife. For Eva Hesse, 1968 will be her most prolific year. Her work is included in Antiform, a group show assembled in an almost knee-jerk response to the Artforum article of the same title by Robert Morris, who writes, "Of the abstract expressionists, only Pollock was able to recover process and hold onto it as part of the end form of the work. Chance is accepted and indeterminacy is implied, since replacing it will result in another configuration." Immediately on the heels of Antiform comes Hesse's first and only solo exhibition during her lifetime, curated by Lucy Lepard. Lepard first met Hesse in 1963, and over the course of the next 5 years would come to be a friend and advocate of the young artist. Through writings and interviews, we know that both Anni Albers and Lee Krasner worked without predetermination. But embracing chance never entailed a neglect for order in either Albers' textiles or Krasner's paintings of the 40s and 50s. Born in the same generation, they both lived through 2 world wars and survived the dire circumstances of the Depression. Through their art, they created order at times when they could not impose it elsewhere. Eva Hesse's process is also not one of planning. Born a generation later, her approach is different. Rather than making art that brings order to the chaos of life, Hesse brings the two together through chaos finding order. Her work informs the way in which chaos and order can, even must, coexist. By combining industrial materials with domestic crafts learned in her childhood and her formal training as an artist, Hesse's sculptures are inherently autobiographical, physical attempts to resolve the dichotomies and contradictions she finds in herself. In 1968, through Lee Krasner's masterful manipulation of the story, and through Anni Albers' steadfast refusal to share one at all, the mythology of these 2 artists has already formed. Eva Hesse is still writing in her diary. She keeps her insecurities and self-doubt contained in its pages, crafting and defining herself for posterity. By defining their identities as artists, women, wives, and even as widows, each of the 3 continues to control her own narrative and to prepare the foundations of her legacy. Anni Albers, Lee Krasner, and Eva Hesse do not meet in person in 1968 or ever. Hesse might have scorned both Albers and Krasner for sacrificing their own aspirations to support the careers of their husbands. She is too young to have seen Lee Krasner's work in the galleries of New York City in the 1940s, and only 16 years old when Anni Albers has her solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in 1949. In 1968, Eva Hesse is, despite her youth, the most well-known among the 3 artists in New York. Anni Albers, by choice, is at home with her husband, and Lee Krasner is painting, very quickly making up for lost time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm DJ. The thesis is called Bass Notes, after the notes in Perfume. In 1995, the musician and author David Toop described ambient music as music aspiring to the condition of perfume. For this project, I've written 60 tiny texts that aspire to the condition of music that aspires to the condition of perfume. So I'm going to be announcing the name of the author as well as the title of the piece of music that each of these texts refer to. Steve Rodin, The Radio, from 1999. I made a cabinet. You can fit 5 flutes inside, and 1 flute broken into 3 pieces. When you put the flutes in, each flute learns a new song. One song is called Ghost Town with Creaky Shutters. One song is called Flotsam of Vinyl Crackle. One song is called Water Nymph Sailing on a Stepping Stone. One song is called Chocolate Bamboo in the Evening. You close the cabinet using the knob. The knob is made of frog croaks. When it's closed, the cabinet starts to snore. When you're sleeping, it washes out to sea. Keith Barry, Towards the Blue Peninsula, from 2013. A clam is mostly curtain, especially for people who have never eaten clam. It's the curtains that are the most famous. Take away the clam curtains and, without the context of pasta or juice or bake, the image of a curtainless clam is not compelling. I do not go out of my way to imagine a curtainless clam against a white background. Considering from the clam perspective, it is unclear how they must feel about this. In their life, constant filtration leaves much time for thinking and curtain watching. Planktons must play a role. Depending on the color plankton the clam eats, it is possible clams feel sometimes wistful about curtain, blue plankton, or mournful, green plankton, or free, red plankton. Cellar, in All Deracinated Things, from the album 2 Days and 1 Night, 2015. Of all trees, stoplights are the only kind of trees cars pay attention to. In fall, the cars gather at their feet like fallen nuts. In spring, the cars waft through them like hazes of blown pollen. On highways, it is always spring. A single stoplight arcs over all road, stretched band of green taffy, swaying tree. On all highways, under invisible green canopies, flashing red lights converge on the scenes of car wrecks. Andrew Chalk and Tom James Scott, Wildflowers, from 2013. 88 tubes are harvested from a sparkling wreckage of wind chimes. The chimes are stretched taut and laid on their sides. Then, a person with long fingers christens them keys. Now, the wind must pass through a human's fingers. The main difference between a wind chime and a piano is pianists forget that they are the wind, that a wind chime collects them, that the piano is only a wind chime in an advanced stage of forgetting. Cylon, Resonance, from 2009. There's a ring. It doesn't weigh anything, but it feels like it weighs a lot. Once you put it on, you can't take it off. The ring has to do with books. Normally, when you close a book for the last time in your life, you don't know for certain if you'll open it again. It makes a normal sound when it closes, a sound that's not different from the sound of closing a book any other time. When wearing the ring, you will always know when it's the last time you ever close a book. Because instead of the normal book closing sound, it will make a water splashing sound. It will make the sound of if you dropped that book in the water. Someday, almost every book you close will make a splashing sound, like all your books have gone underwater, so you can't read them anymore. This is one way to know. Belong, October Language, from 2005. You can't drive because there are too many kites in the sky. Your wipers don't help at all. It's not the kites themselves, but what the kites do. What they do is red, possibly ochre. Ochre is a little brown, the nibbling of brown. The TV news stations all used to be in black and white, not a single color channel. And then one day that became not true. When the news people went to work that day, they said a lot of things about it to each other. Every time I use my voice, I use that voice for the last and first time. It leaves my body and doesn't come back. It covers me and it's never coming back. Its leaving vector, a most temporary dress, which, if you listen carefully, is not in fact quiet. It's awful. Tomonari Nozaki, A History of Blue, from 2013. 1. Thin sheets of liquefied pearl slide down a large bell and cascade off its edges. Forming a drape as it falls, the pearl collects in a saucer beneath the bell, where you are invited to bathe. 2. You could draw a straight line from the center of the earth out to the sky. You could draw it so that the line goes through an urn on the way. Sometimes, an airplane will fly over the urn. The airplane would fly through the line, so the line touches the plane and urn at the same time. Inside the urn, there's lots of ash. Inside the airplane, there's lots of people flying in an airplane. 3. It's possible to peel back the layers of a highway and get closer to a center. The top layer of a highway is the sun, which bakes on like a glaze. Then there's a layer of heavy eyelids, then one of dust and rubber, then a very thin layer of flattened blood, then a layer of radio static, a layer of gray days, then blue light. From here, bumpy cars block the way down. One more. Brian Eno, Discrete Music from 1974. You wake up and cry because your eyeballs are looking at yourself from the nightstand. When you cry, you have no skin on the face. There is sea silk and no pain. You take your eyes and skim them like pebbles across a deep lake, so that when they falter and sink to the bottom, they will see the same thing as your blindness. Thanks.
My name is Hakim Bishara, and I wrote it's a play about an exhibition from 43 that nobody knows about. And there is a painter in that exhibition who uses the initials MS. Her name is Madame MS. You can see the cover of this old exhibition, which I discovered by chance in some archive in Jerusalem. And here's Madame MS. And I had to reimagine this story. So I wrote a play, and we're going to read one scene of that play with the help of Danny and Emma. The scene is called The Road to Jerusalem. So I'm going to set up the scene, read the stage directions, and together we'll do the rest. So the Road to Jerusalem, a candlelit oval table. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? A candlelit oval table at the center of a darkened stage. The table is brimming with archival materials. Leather-bound dossiers, stuffed file folders, correspondences, photocopies of pictures and paintings, newspaper clips, postcards, a magnifying glass, and finally, a silver planchette over a makeshift Ouija board that was scribbled onto an old colonial map. The archive chorus, this is us, enters the room. The three researchers take seats around the table. Each presses a finger on the planchette. We have researched and investigated and browsed through archives in Paris, Beirut, and Jerusalem, but still nothing about you. We have crossed sealed borders, broken barriers of language and nationality, to ask about you, and still nothing to be found.
We
Come to tell the story of an old
exchange between friends
who became enemies. We have disinterred its scattered remains, reassembled the pieces of its chronicles, and we are here to pass it on to the world. But one mystery remains unsolved. A woman lost between the folds of history. A woman who exists only in 2 letters and 2 unfound paintings. Under their guise of innocent preservation, archives are sites of death and violence, teemed with ghosts and phantoms and dislocated souls. We therefore turn to the occult as our next research method. Madame MS, are you here? Madame MS, are you here with us? Now the planchet moves to the writing yes. On the Ouija board, the 3 researchers look at each other and nod. What is your real name? After a pause, the planchet moves to the letters M and then S. The researchers exchange looks of frustration. They ask a series of questions but get no answer from Madame MS and gradually lose their patience. How old were you in 1943?
Where did you live in Beirut?
How many children did you have?
Were you a Maronite Christian? Were you a Muslim? A Jew? A Druze?
Were you a famous femme de monde bohemian who lived a double life by writing and painting under a pseudonym?
Were you a fictional character contrived by Georges Cyr?
When did you die? Were you a communist Jewish lesbian spy?
The researchers give up on the Ouija board and try another tactic. They hold hands, close their eyes, and listen instead of speaking. They get started when they hear a woman's voice, but the voice is forlorn and soft. Madame MS, tell us who you are.
I have forgotten myself. It's only through your thoughts that I can remember who I am. You must reimagine the past into the future to know what has come to pass.
The researchers open their eyes and disentangle their hands. 1943. Europe is in flames, but in the East, culture thrives. Beirut is called Paris of the Middle East, and in Palestine, Jerusalem, Haifa, and Jaffa become bustling urban centers where artists, writers, and musicians from across the region convene and consort. With 1 foot out of Lebanon, France Libre sponsors one of its last colonial exhibitions at the Bezalel Museum in Jerusalem. These are the events that led to the opinion of l'art moderne au Liban. This is the Bezalel Museum on the right. The researchers rise from their seats, move the chairs away from the table, and bring a large empty board into the stage. Let's say it's this screen. A stronger light in the room. Before each line they say, they pick a document from the archive and cite it and then pin it on that board. January 8th, 1943, a letter from the Secretary General of France Libre's delegation to the Levant to George Cyr, the curator of this exhibition. The project is approved. The opening is scheduled to September 15th that year.
Alas, Cyr fears that the deadline is too tight. Only in March 1943 does he reply to a letter from the Bezalel Museum in Jerusalem, sent on August 1942, inquiring about the exhibition. Cyr writes, "Participating on behalf of our Lebanese artists is desirable and highly anticipated, but I'm afraid that an opening on September 15th is unrealistically early. Kindly consider rescheduling the exhibition to October or November of this year."
Back in time to August 17th, 1942, an urgent letter sent from the Bezalel Museum to Cyr. Franz Schiff, assistant to the museum director, writes, "Monsieur Cyr, we're eager to hear the news from you. Have you succeeded in securing funds for the exhibition? As you recall, we have set the opening date to September 15th, and as time passes by, we're beginning to feel the pressure mount. The exhibition is eventually postponed to December 12th, since some of the halls of the museum were booked in advance by the British forces for the purpose of a military ball."
August 1943, Narkis sends a report to the Bezalel National Museum's Board of Trustees and writes, "An exhibition by the title New Modern Art in Lebanon will be opened at our museum on Sunday, December 12, 10 a.m., which was later changed to 4 p.m. 90 works, eventually 84 works, by 9 artists will be on view, and these will include oil paintings, watercolors, drawings, and sculptures. Participating artists, Kopel, Sear, Ecochard, Fortier, Moron, Onsi, Tabet, Houaik, and ML. Now, Narkis confuses Madame MS with Madame ML all through his correspondences. The two other researchers mount portraits of the participating artists on the board. Madame MS is missing. You.
Oh, me.
No, you.
First, the works travel by car to the seaside city of Naqoura in southern Lebanon, the closest geographical point to Palestine. Then they are loaded onto a ship to Jaffa Tel Aviv's port, and from there they are transported by a truck to Jerusalem. On November 24th, the shipment arrives, 13 boxes weighing 500 kilograms.
On November 29th, Narkis writes a letter to Gabriel Bonor, Commissioner of Education by France Libre, to thank him for the shipment. "We are enchanted by the works," he writes. "We dare count on you to allow us the pleasure of seeing you at the opening. It would also please us if Monsieur Cyr gives a speech at the opening."
November 30th, a package from Beirut arrives at the Bezalel Museum containing the list of works and a short bio for each artist handwritten by Cyr. Meanwhile, Cyr is on the road, making his way to Jerusalem for the install. He takes a bus from Beirut to Haifa, and then another one from Haifa to Jerusalem. A simple and easy routine drive at those times, but an impossible task today.
You can see the bus from the 40s on the left over there. Now, December 1st, Narkis jots down a text for the catalog of the exhibition. This exhibition is the beginning of a series of exchange exhibitions with our neighboring countries. It's a country, actually, Lebanon. Its title alone demonstrates our interest in the works of artists hailing from Paris, where modern art pulsated and will hopefully return to pulsate. This is 1943, World War II. It pleases us to know that there are culture centers around us, still keeping that pulse alive.
December 4th, outgoing telegram from Narkis to Consul General du Chelard inviting him to the opening. Incoming telegram from Bonor to Narkis confirming his arrival to the opening on the 12th. Narkis sends the invitations, the catalog, and the posters to print and drives to the BBC radio studios in Jaffa to record an announcement for the show. The Jewish National Museum has the honor to inform you of the opening of the exhibition L'Art Moderne au Liban, to be opened by J. Ben Zavi, Chairman, the General Council, National Committee of the Jewish Community in Palestine, and by Monsieur Georges Cyr, artist painter of Beirut, on Sunday, December 12, 1943, 4 p.m. at the museum.
Saturday, December 11th, the Bezalel Museum. The exhibition is all set for the opening next day.
I remember now.
Blackout.
I'm Ann Collins, and the name of my thesis is No Place Like Home, Dwelling, Art, and Impermanence. Can you hear me? No? Okay. Okay. The old aquatics building in Fort Tilden was erected just after the First World War and functioned as a bathhouse for soldiers who patrolled the Rockaways, a ribbon of oceanfront that stretches across the bottom of Queens, New York. Eyes fixed on the horizon or maybe searching the green undulations of surf, they patrolled the beach and waited for imaginary invaders that never arrived. Salty from rigorous morning swims or shivering after a night spent in an open craft, they warmed up, or at least hoped to, in hot showers within the single-story structure that was built at a border where bayberry and goldenrod give way to a sandy beach. In those days, the oversized guest houses were lit up at night. The roller coaster at Playland rumbled and groaned, and songs could still be heard coming from the pubs that lined Rockaway Beach Boulevard. But that was long ago, before the causeway connected the peninsula to the rest of Long Island, before the lean years in the 70s when the city went belly up and the shopkeepers left, and Robert Moses raised block after block of summer bungalows to make room for high-rise buildings in which he planned to warehouse the poor. That was before the fort was decommissioned, before the army pulled out, leaving the building to fall apart on its own, before the restless young people, alone or in pairs or packs, eager for adventure, yet stranded on an appendage of a forgotten outer burrow, climbed over the dunes or snuck through the fence and broke into the building to smoke a joint, drink a beer, and cover the walls inside and out with layer upon layer of graffiti. And yet the building stood, an abandoned ruin, left to weather years of Atlantic storms, urban decay, falling civilizations, gaining charisma even as it crumbled. Ruins stand as reminders, writes essayist Rebecca Solnit. Memory is always incomplete, always imperfect, always falling into ruin. But the ruins themselves, like other traces, are treasures, our links to what came before, our guide to situating ourselves in a landscape of time. The Aquatics building, humble as it was, housed the histories of the place in which it stood, accumulated time in its walls. Eventually, the beach it stands on was rediscovered, and word spread about a pristine stretch of sand set apart from the lifeguard whistles and crowds of the other Rockaway strands. The building became an unofficial landmark, a meeting spot, a shelter into which one could duck if the sun got too hot or if there was a sudden shower, the sight of it beautiful in a gritty, run-down way, comforting even as it dismayed. For while the ruination of architecture confronts us with the unyielding fact of impermanence, the tenacity some structures hold kindles an irresistible belief in the possibility of a future, a restoration of a self that is sometimes perceived to be lost and alone in the world, in need of shelter. Ruins reveal what has disappeared into time, but they also affirm what doggedly remains. The persistence of a ruin gives us something to work with, reminds us that all is not lost, invites us to engage with what is left. Whatever a building once was, it might be again, or it might be something even better. If this is true, might not the same hope of transformation be possible for the individual? Robert Smithson writes in his 1967 essay, A Tour of the Monuments of Passaic, I am convinced that the future is lost somewhere in the dumps of the non-historical past. A great flaneur as well as artist and writer, Smithson was speaking of a post-war prowl he took through the wasteland of a New Jersey town. But his notion of a non-historical past applies to the Rockaways just as much as it does Passaic. In America, the sagging dilapidation of architecture is not regarded romantically. Sentiment is not held for the old and crumbling. Things are torn down, paved over, built new. History is disregarded, tossed in the rubbish bin alongside nostalgia and remembrance. But such a narrowing of vision is not without its price. Joan Didion writes, we are well advised to keep on nodding terms with the people we used to be, an affirmation of Smithson's fear that in carting away the remains of the past, we have lost any hope of discovering what treasure may have been buried beneath the floorboards. Didion's warning is seldom heeded. When the wind of Hurricane Sandy clawed its way up from the water and took a near-fatal swipe at the meager beach community in 2012, it left the Aquatics building, along with most of the homes and structures nearby, architecturally unsound, aligning the structure's fate with the city's impulse to clear away what no longer functions as originally intended. In the years following Sandy, efforts were made to restore the Rockaway beaches as a welcoming seaside destination for day trippers from Brooklyn and Manhattan. Fort Tilden reopened to the public in 2014 as part of the Gateway Park system and fast became a Tony spot for urbane beachgoers. Last summer, as part of the Rockaway Arts Festival, German artist Katharina Gross temporarily transformed the Aquatics building into a site-specific installation that reimagined it as an open house where visitors could mingle and climb around. Rockaway is a biennial public event conceived by MoMA PS1's director Klaus Biesenbach and artist and musician Patti Smith. Both own homes in the Rockaways. At the start of her process, Gross cleared the building of all detritus and errant vegetation, swept clean its floor, and covered every inch of it with a fresh coat of whitewash, erasing all evidence of vandalism and neglect with a stark newness. She then mixed scarlet, ruby, and magenta, colors ranging from a deep red to a hot pink, then hurled her paint onto the surfaces of the building over and over, sometimes working from the ground, sometimes hovering in a cherry picker crane above the roof. Inside and out, Gross allowed her colors to swoop along the walls, ceilings, and roof of the house, or to blow over it, settling in thick swirls of pigment. A YouTube video produced by MoMA PS1 shows her wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, walking around the half-finished site with a casually but elegantly dressed Klaus Biesenbach, both of them carrying a Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup. My collaboration with Klaus was, slight pause, interesting, she notes in voiceover, then reports that he told her the density of her red paint no longer related to the colors of sand and sea. The next morning, I was able to see I needed to allow the paint to move more freely. A montage of images shows Gross back in the cherry picker, atomizing the nearly all-red house with ribbons of white paint in response to her patron's consultation. Even after the adjustment, her colors mingled and built into a dizzying intensity. The crimson streaks of Rockaway evoked the last hours of a day by the sea, when the sun casts fiery colors over everything on the shore before sinking below the horizon. Streams of white paint mirrored tendrils of mist that snaked up from the ocean on foggy days. Set against the cool blue of the summer sky and a green-gray band of the sea, the work's vibrancy produced a joyful contrast to its peaceful setting. From a distance, the house could not be missed, yet Gross's palette was not entirely incongruous. Her reds and pinks stood out in the way beach roses, fuchsia, or holly berries pop against the neutral greens and beiges in which they grow. The image was not so much that of a house on fire, but a house that was at the same time a welcoming hearth, a warm, glowing thing entreating passers-by to enter. Inside, the house smelled of paint, of fresh starts and new beginnings. Working within the house denied Gross the freedom of raining paint from her cherry picker, and the wiggle of her wrist, her footsteps and stance as she pointed her sprayer could be felt in the way the paint pooled and dripped. There is always an intimacy gleaned from stepping inside a house. The details of objects and how they are arranged reveal the particular way its occupants live. While the immediate story of the house was one of abandonment, there remained, too, the traces of the artist and her determination to revive the space, her reds a transfusion of fresh blood, her pinks a reminder of the ouchiness of sunburns. Thank you.
My name is Cigdem, and my thesis is entitled This Fabulous Shadow Only the Sea Keeps. This is a part from my first chapter, which is about this painting. Azure, depths of the North Atlantic, time non-existent. Her voice sounded like a flame coming to life, dancing. At first, blue, almost dazzling with a neon glow, and then for a second, a very dark blue. Like the night with no moonlight, a deep azure, and then finally pure white. The deep abyss of the oceans and its inhabitants are, for humankind, still a mystery. Once the oldest ancestors of humankind dwelled in the sea. But man doesn't belong there anymore, even though he yearns to. Underneath the sea, where all the noise is canceled out into a stuffed, encapsulating feeling of silence, is like the hidden corners of space, or constellations light years away. Deep down, creatures of water bide, like once the oldest ancestors of humankind did, and some of them sing. John Berger, one of the greatest writers about art for the century to come, wrote in Once in a Story, quote, "Those who first invented and then named the constellations were storytellers. Tracing an imaginary line between a cluster of stars gave them an image and an identity. The stars threaded on that line were like events threaded on a narrative. Imagining the constellations did not, of course, change the stars, nor did it change the black emptiness that surrounds them. What it changed was the way people read the night sky," unquote. It would also be the work of storytellers to speak of the world underwater. But who but they could describe the intensely white, humongous, yet caring and graceful creature living 1,000 miles below, singing with her hypnotizing voice to find her way? A beast so big that in her veins children could swim. and with whose oil humankind would produce power and light and color? During the time when Turner and Melville lived, the oceans were the deep space of the next century, a mystical realm, hiding great fantasy creatures and horrific monsters within its depths, where no man ever went. But the distances a great mind can go cannot be mapped or limited. Dive, she used to sing, dive deep, and invited a poet herder across time and space. In the year 1809, William Turner wrote a poem on a small wrinkled page of his Hastings notebook. To mark thy once domain, where pleasure seemed to reign, gently lifted over the azure main, that humbled at the feet rest. Was he thinking of the whale? He was a storyteller, and he was in love with the sea and the ocean and the unknown. In his mind, the mallard, a whaler very similar to the Essex from that disaster of the last decade, was about to capture a marvelous whale. The scene was later to be described by William Thackeray, quote, "That is not a smear of purple you see yonder, but a beautiful whale, whose tail has just slapped a half-dozen whaleboats into perdition. And as for what you fancied to be a few zigzag lines spattered on the canvas at haphazard look, they turn out to be a ship with all her sails." Unquote. William Turner dived into the abyss of his own mind, and there he found the whale. When he swam back out, his mind's eye had already seen a ship called the Mallard that never existed except on a canvas. Its fate was bound with that of the Essex within the ocean. Crimson, North Atlantic Ocean, November 1819. The second mate watched the whaleboats pull away. 3 boats with 6 men each, armed with harpoons and darts, moved further and further away into the foggy horizon. Once or twice they were concealed in the foamy outbursts of briny seawater, caused by their prey splashing underneath. From the size of the wave, the mate on board knew that this spermaceti whale was a big one. The bigger the beast, the more fame and glory it would bring them. He tried to imagine how proud he would be if they returned home with their cellar full. Capturing a whale in this age meant money, power, and eternal reputation. But most of all, a successful hunt meant a victory against Mother Nature, against God, against all the earthborn men and women and species of the world, won proudly and gloriously. Human race ruled the world, fought tooth and claw with the rest of the species for thousands of years. And it was they who defeated monsters as big as their ships and turned them into gold. And no one would take that away. These men, ordinary folk from the land of Nantucket who grew up with stories of oceans from generations of fishermen, were arrogant and greedy. They yelled and fought and rowed with all their strength to reach the whale. None cared how soaked they were or how tired. If she could growl, she would. All the 3 harpoons had hit their mark. The whale, in all her magnificence, splashed her flat giant tail to the sea and fell. White foams turned into a morbid pink, and the sea crimson. Black, 1851. On a starless Black Friday night in New York, Herman Melville drank 2 bottles of fine whiskey by himself. Tomorrow, the 18th of October, was the day his book was being published in Britain. Dive, sang the whale. She was wounded, and her blood was painting the olive-tinted glimmering sea in crimson, vermilion, and a diluted pink. The drops of blood, blending in the salt water, shined like golden flakes on a snowy day. She went deep inside the ocean, fearful, diving to hide herself in the farthest corners of her home, to get away from the rage and greed and brutality of men. A pawn in their game, they war with everything that was not them. The 3 harpoons on her back didn't pierce deep, and the ropes of those little men couldn't be longer than the lengths she would go. After he finished his sketch on a sunny day on the coast of Margate, William Turner noted on the side, "He breaks away," and she did. With a roar of splashing water and a crash of magnificent streaming waves, she hauled out of the ocean. Her grandiosity, more than all the men on their now seemingly pathetically ingloriously small ship, and even smaller whaleboats could ever imagine, was bewitching. She emerged from the surface with all her power, all the sublimity she had got. The sailors in the boats were bathed, drowning. With the surf sheet burst, they tried to hold on, hopelessly although, to the edges of the cracking, watering boats. Her tail, as big as 5 cannons altogether, wrecked the boats, and Mallard in the distance could only watch. William Turner died looking at the sun in his house on World's End that he shared with Mrs. Booth on December 19th. It was only 2 months after a great admirer of him, Herman Melville, published his book about a white whale called Moby Dick. The painter's last words, muttered almost choking to catch his breath, and growling as he always did, were, "The sun is God." Thank you.
Never mind the long name. My name is Nahid. And actually the title of my thesis is Some Moments of Spectrality Captured in Qajar Painting. Imagine a time around 1798 when a court painter trapped in the claws of power has been commanded to paint Fath Ali Shah, king of Persia, the second emperor during the Qajar dynasty, 1785 to 1925, who witnessed some of the most decisive developments in Iran's modern history. The narcissistic king who loved to frequently pose for the court painter, and among many other features, he was best known for his long beard and his not-so-manly wasp-like waist. After all, he needed to flaunt them in his large life-size portraits, which he regarded as the emblems of monarchy. As the most significant patron of the arts, supporting the painters, poets, musicians, and other artists, he provided them with a livelihood. In return, the artists worked only for him. Keep staring for a few seconds at the image, and you begin to feel the weight of a gaze. Just like experiencing a lived event, we find ourselves in the reality that the image portrays, where we actually are not in that real time and place, but we still feel living in that past event. Through historical readings, interpretations, and images, we start rereading the reality, a reality which is far from the real. The painting represents a non-real reality, while being detached from the actual time and space in which it was created, and we become responsible for this recreation. The image is home to a reality. However, this home is outside itself, and that is when the specter comes and begins to live a posthumous life. A form of life, but that begins only when everything is finished, when everything is complete. Whether consciously or not, it seems the court painter prescribed formal solutions at a time when social contradictions in Iran had reached a critical level, perhaps just like what Frederick Jameson proposes in his reading of Claude Lévi-Strauss's essay, The Structural Study of Myth. Through the unrealistic and elaborate depictions of the hunting and battle scenes, monumental and life-size paintings of the king, these contradictions were being resolved in the aesthetic realm. Because Qajar paintings clearly contradict reality. They disclose mysteries in the most enigmatic way. They reveal a reality which is different from the actual one, a different reality. They represent a body other than that of the monarchs, a ghost-like body that is present in the illusory reality of the presence of the actual kings. This specter, as Jacques Derrida puts, is something that one does not know. Not out of ignorance, but because this non-object, this non-present present, this being there of an absent or departed one, no longer belongs to knowledge. As furtive and untimely as the apparition of a specter could be, it becomes an unnameable thing that haunts the image of power. Now imagine a time almost 2 centuries after, when the despots believed their glorious times would continue for eternity. Well, they did not, and those kings are long gone. Imagine a time when a prominent contemporary Iranian artist, Aydin Aghdashlu, in an attempt to evoke a sense of the past, chooses Qajar paintings and offers his own interpretations of those once glorious times. Aghdashlu also creates a different reality, perhaps one that is closer to reality than the one portrayed in the original Qajar paintings. More perceptive than the usual spectators of those paintings, and having felt a non-present present in them, he keeps manipulating the images. He distorts them in the hopes of extracting something out of them. By drawing the original model in its exclusive space and only its outer form, Ağdaşlı visualizes something that, despite having features in common with the model, is a different entity that tells a different story. The gaze is still there, and it is addressing the spectator. One moment, the void of the body pictured on the canvas grabs the spectator's attention. Another moment, the empty body embodies a presence. The image as a home to the dead king has been distorted and modified, yet it is still home to a reality. The reality of a moment living in the presence of a specter. A non-being being that defies being identified or captured. Yet there are moments in the constant play of the colors on the canvas and the constant play of the appearance and disappearance of a presence where these spectralities are captured. Once they're captured, they keep returning and haunting infinitely. Hence, 200 plus years after the prominence of Qajar painting, after its glorious times are long gone, another spectral moment is captured. The contemporary artist, just like the court painters, laments the callousness of the ruling power in his artwork. The time past and present may differ, but in essence, they are the same. A despot or a totalitarian regime would always act the same to promote their ideological hegemonies. The two worlds of past and present may seem too distant from each other, but in reality, the furtive and ungraspable visibility of invisible reveals their resemblances. It is the artist who captures these moments. They offer responses to the discontents brewing in the country, whether it be the cruelty and brutality incurred by the Qajar kings, or the dogmatism of the alleged traditionalism adherent by the Islamic government. In Qajar royal portraits, the king inhabits the specter. He occupies it, or perhaps even usurps it. He embodies the apparition, and the specter keeps haunting him. The specter is conjured and keeps reappearing. It comes back, because it begins by doing so. It appears to unreal realities, to different realities, to specters as such. One can never draw a line between a specter and the actual present reality, because it is the future. It is always to come. It haunts and is captured in some moments. When is the right time for that? No one can answer it. The specter resists and defies time. The specter, as the habitation without proper inhabiting, returns. It causes. It inhabits without residing, and it haunts. This unnameable thing, which is neither soul nor body, does not appear in a body, but rather in a becoming body. Just as it shuns being captured, embodied, and confined, it eludes restraining itself to the words in the books and even in this passage. It is just simply here, even as I am reading these lines to you. Thank you.
Thank you. The class of 2017 would like to say thank you all for coming, and we wanted to take this opportunity before we all disperse and celebrate further to really thank Jennifer Krasinski. While we are deeply indebted to many, many people here and who actually couldn't be here tonight, none of us would be here in this state without her. So thank you, Jennifer, very much for all of you have done for us and taught us and shown us, etc.